Admiral Zexthera had commanded the Galactic Coalition's Third Fleet for over 2 decades, witnessing 17 major conflicts across 4-star systems. War, in his experience, followed predictable patterns. Fleets maneuvered according to established doctrine, battles unfolded with mathematical precision, and victory belonged to whoever possessed superior numbers or technology. There were no mysteries left in warfare, only variables to calculate and outcomes to predict. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Sovereign's Edge, Zexthera reviewed the tactical displays with practiced confidence. The human colony of New Terra lay before them, defended by what intelligence reports described as a modest orbital defense network and a small garrison. The humans had been in space for barely 2 centuries, their technology crude by galactic standards, their military doctrine primitive at best. Admiral, his tactical officer, Commander Valens, approached with the final assault plan. All 3 battle groups are in position. The humans have deployed their entire defensive fleet, 47 vessels of varying classes. Our force strength is 600 ships. Zexthera's 4 eyes studied the formation patterns displayed in the holographic tank. The human ships hung in space like scattered debris, showing no recognizable battle formation. Their largest vessel measured barely 800 meters in length, dwarfed by the Coalition's smallest destroyers. Most puzzling was their positioning. Rather than forming a defensive sphere around their planet, they had arranged themselves in what appeared to be random clusters throughout the system. Curious, Zexthera muttered, his chitinous fingers tapping against the command console. They're violating every principle of defensive warfare. Either they're completely incompetent, or what? Admiral, Velnis inquired. Nothing. Proceed with the attack. Signal all battle groups to advance. We'll crush their outer perimeter first, then systematically destroy their planetary defenses. Standard Coalition doctrine. The fleet moved forward like a great metal tide, engines blazing blue-white against the star field. Zexthera had executed this same maneuver countless times against countless species. The Kethvar Rebellion, the Mortai Uprising, the Silicate Wars, all had followed the same pattern. Overwhelming force, systematic destruction, inevitable surrender. The first engagement began exactly as expected. Coalition destroyers opened fire on the scattered human ships with plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. Energy signatures bloomed across his sensors as the weapons found their targets. But instead of the anticipated explosions, something else happened. The human ships scattered, not in retreat, but in a fluid, almost organic pattern that reminded Zexthera of a school of fish evading a predator. They moved with impossible coordination, as if linked by some invisible nervous system. Where his tactical computers predicted they would be, empty space remained. What they actually appeared defied every algorithm in his database. Sir, Valens's voice carried a note of confusion. Our hit ratio is registering at 12%. That's unusually low. Zexthera leaned forward, studying the tactical display more carefully. The human ships weren't just evading randomly. They were herding his forces, drawing them into specific positions. More concerning, their weapons fire, while less powerful than Coalition standards, demonstrated accuracy rates that bordered on impossible. Every human shot seemed to find weak points in armor plating, gaps in shield coverage, vulnerable system nodes. How are they targeting our ships so precisely? He demanded. Their scanning technology is centuries behind ours. Before Velenais could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. The tactical display erupted in new contacts, hundreds of them, appearing from seemingly empty space throughout the system. Ships emerged from behind asteroids that sensors had verified as solid rock, rose from the planetary surface where orbital mechanics said nothing could hide, and materialized from positions that violated every known law of physics. Impossible d'extrahabreted. Our sensors swept this entire system. There were only 47 ships. Admiral, the communications officer called out, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Audio only. Put it through. A calm, distinctly human voice filled the bridge. The words were spoken in accented galactic standard, but the tone carried absolute confidence. Coalition Fleet. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Force. You are trespassing in human space with hostile intent. You have 30 seconds to withdraw your forces beyond the heliopause, or we will be forced to defend our territory. Zextharaz's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. Reply to the humans. Inform them that they are outnumbered 15-1 and should surrender immediately to avoid unnecessary casualties. The response came back almost instantly. Admiral, your mathematics appear flawed. I count 600 coalition ships. Our fleet strength is... There was a pause, as if the human admiral was consulting her instruments. Well, let's say substantially more than that. Final warning, withdraw now. Arrogant mammals, Zextharaz snarled. All ships, open fire. Destroy every human vessel in this system. What happened next would haunt Zextharaz's dreams for the rest of his life. The human ships moved like nothing he had ever witnessed. They didn't simply evade incoming fire. They seemed to anticipate it, beginning evasive maneuvers before coalition weapons had even locked on. Their formations flowed and shifted with liquid grace. Individual ships sliding through gaps in the coalition's attack patterns that appeared and disappeared in split-second intervals. More disturbing was their weaponry. The humans fired projectiles, actual physical projectiles in an age of energy weapons, but these weren't the crude missiles as intelligence reports had described. They moved with impossible agility, changing direction multiple times during flight, pursuing coalition ships through complex evasion patterns as if guided by living minds. Sir, Villeneuve reported, his voice tight with disbelief. We've lost contact with the heavy cruiser determination. Sensors show massive hull breaches throughout the ship. How? What weapon could penetrate our armor so completely? The projectile appears to have been kinetic, sir. A simple mass driver round. But it struck with 17 times the energy our calculations show as possible. On the tactical display, Zextharaz watched as human ships performed maneuvers that should have torn them apart from acceleration stress. They spun and dove through space like atmospheric fighters, their hulls somehow withstanding gravitational forces that should have crushed their crews into paste. Admiral, another officer called out, Second Battle Group reports they're taking heavy casualties. The humans are using some kind of coordinated swarm tactics. Our ships can't target them effectively. Zextharaz stared at the display in growing horror. Coalition vessels, ships that had conquered a dozen species, were being picked apart by an enemy that shouldn't have posed any threat. The human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship perfectly coordinated with every other, responding to coalition movements before those movements were even complete. Sir, Villeneuve's voice cracked with panic. Multiple human ships are approaching our position. They're flying directly through our defensive fire. Impossible accélération pattern, impossibilité de formation. Through the bridge's massive viewports, Zextharaz could see them coming. Sleek human vessels racing toward his flagship in a formation that resembled a three-dimensional spear point. Energy blasts from his escorts' weapons passed harmlessly around them, as if the ships existed slightly out of phase with normal space. All power to forward shields, he commanded. Prepare for ramming speed. But the humans didn't ram. Instead, they swept past the Sovereign's edge in a maneuver so close that Zextharaz could see individual hull markings on their ships. As they passed, something detached from each vessel, small, dark objects that moved with deliberate purpose toward his ship's hull. Boarding pods, Venice whispered. The pods struck with surgical precision, each one targeting critical system nodes that weren't even visible from outside the ship. How they knew exactly where to hit remained a mystery that Zextharaz's mind refused to accept. Security teams to all breach points, he ordered, but even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The humans had done something impossible. They had boarded a coalition dreadnought in the middle of a space battle and somehow knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. Throughout the ship, lights flickered and died as critical systems went offline. The humans weren't just fighting his fleet, they were fighting as if they knew every weakness, every vulnerability, every tactical doctrine in the Coalition's arsenal. "Admiral," Villeneuve reported quietly, "we've lost 60% of our fleet's strength. The remaining ships are requesting permission to withdraw." Zextera looked at the tactical display one final time. Red icons, Coalition ships destroyed or disabled, outnumbered the blue friendly contacts by an impossible margin. In 30 minutes of combat, the humans had achieved something no enemy had ever managed. They had shattered a Coalition fleet without losing a single vessel of their own. "Signal the retreat," he said finally. "All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance." As his surviving ships limped away from the human system, Zextera found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans had fought with a coordination and tactical brilliance that bordered on supernatural. They had demonstrated technology that violated known physics, employed strategies that defied military logic, and achieved victory through means his mind couldn't begin to comprehend. For the first time in his career, Admiral Zextera had encountered a true mystery in warfare. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible thought was beginning to form. What if this was only the beginning of what humanity could do? 3 standard months after the disaster at New Terra, Admiral Zextera stood before the Coalition High Command, facing questions he couldn't answer. The war room's circular chamber echoed with the chittering, growling, and whistling voices of a dozen different species, all demanding explanations for the impossible defeat. "You claim," High Chancellor Morgeth spoke through his translator implant, "that 47 human ships defeated 600 Coalition vessels without sustaining a single loss. Perhaps you would care to explain how this miracle occurred." Zextera's 4 eyes swept across the assembled leaders. Representatives from the Kethvar hegemony, the Silicate Collective, the Mortai Empire, species that had all fallen to Coalition might, watched him with expressions ranging from disbelief to barely concealed satisfaction. His failure had given them hope that the Coalition wasn't invincible. "High Chancellor, I can only report what occurred. The humans demonstrated tactical capabilities far beyond our intelligence estimates. Their coordination, their technology, their strategic thinking all exceed our current understanding." Chancellor Velmora of the Science Directorate leaned forward, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns. "Admiral, our analysts have reviewed your ship's sensor logs. The data shows several impossibilities. Human vessels accelerating at rates that should have liquefied their crews. Projectile weapons striking with energy levels their launchers cannot generate. Ships appearing in locations where no ships existed moments before." "I'm aware of what the data shows," Zextera replied carefully. "I was present for these events." Then, perhaps, High Chancellor Morgeth's tone carried dangerous undertones. "You can explain why the Coalition's most experienced fleet commander allowed himself to be defeated by primitive mammals who have barely mastered faster-than-light travel." Before Zextera could respond, the chamber's central display activated, showing the concerned face of Admiral Kexnari, commander of the 7th Fleet. His image flickered with interference from whatever star system he was broadcasting from. "High Command," Kexnari's voice crackled through the speakers. "I'm afraid I have urgent news regarding the human situation." "Proceed, Admiral," Morgeth commanded. 3 days ago, my fleet encountered human forces in the Kepler 442 system. A routine patrol discovered them establishing what appeared to be a mining operation on one of the outer planets. I moved to intercept with standard protocols. Zextera felt ice forming in his chest cavity. "How many ships, Admiral?" 15 human vessels. My force consisted of 80 ships, including 2 heavy cruisers. Kexnari paused, his expression grim. "High Command, I must report that my fleet suffered complete defeat. We lost 63 ships. The humans suffered no casualties." The chamber erupted in shocked voices from multiple species. Chancellor Velmora's crystalline form pulsed with agitated light patterns while Morgeth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme distress in a species. "Impossible," Morgeth declared. 15 ships cannot defeat 80 coalition vessels. With respect, High Chancellor, I thought the same thing. But the humans, they fought like nothing in our tactical databases. They seemed to know exactly where we would be before we arrived. Their weapons found weaknesses in our armor that our own engineers didn't know existed. And their ships moved in ways that violate everything we understand about physics. Zextaros stepped forward. Admiral Kexnari, did you observe any of the coordination patterns I described in my report? The coordination was unlike anything I've ever witnessed. They moved as if controlled by a single mind, but with individual initiative that no drone fleet could match. More disturbing, they appear to be learning and adapting throughout the engagement. Tactics that worked initially became useless within minutes. Chancellor Velmora's translator crackled as she spoke. Admiral, did your science officer detect any unusual energy signatures? Psionic resonance, quantum entanglement networks, anything that might explain this impossible coordination? Nothing definitive, Chancellor, but there is something strange. Throughout the battle, our sensors detected what appeared to be massive quantum computing activity, not from their ships, but from everywhere, as if the entire system had become a single processing matrix. Zextaroth felt pieces of a terrifying puzzle beginning to connect in his mind. Admiral, did the humans communicate with you during the engagement? Yes, a single transmission. The human commander, identified herself as Captain Rebecca Torres, said something I found deeply disturbing. She told me that fighting the coalition was educational. She thanked me for helping them understand our weaknesses better. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. High Chancellor Morgeth was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. They're learning from each engagement. More than learning, Zextaros said grimly. They're evolving. Every battle makes them more dangerous. Chancellor Velmora's form flickered with rapid light pulses, the equivalent of rapid breathing in her species. If this is accurate, then we face a threat unlike any in galactic history. An enemy that becomes stronger with each encounter, that somehow shares knowledge instantaneously across their entire fleet. High Command, Admiral Kexnari's voice interrupted. There's more. After the battle, my surviving ships detected human vessels throughout the outer system. Not the 15 we initially encountered, but hundreds. They had been there all along, hidden somehow from our sensors. The entire engagement was a test. Zextara closed his eyes, feeling the weight of revelation crushing down on him. They let us attack. Both times we weren't launching an assault. We were walking into a laboratory. A laboratory for what? Morgeth demanded. For studying coalition warfare. For learning how we think, how we fight, how we can be defeated. Zextara opened his eyes, meeting the gaze of each High Chancellor in turn. Respected leaders, I believe we have made a fundamental error. We assumed the humans were a primitive species that could be easily conquered. Instead, we have encountered something far more dangerous. A species that fights not just with weapons, but with intelligence we cannot comprehend. The central display flickered again as new data streams began flowing in from across coalition space. Emergency beacons, distress signals, reports of contact with human forces. Systems that had been safe for centuries were suddenly under threat from an enemy that appeared to be everywhere at once. By the ancestors, Chancellor Velmora whispered, "How many human ships are there?" Admiral Kexnari's image leaned closer to his camera. High Command, during my withdrawal, I detected something that our analysts are still trying to understand. Long-range sensors showed massive construction activity in the outer reaches of human space. Shipyards, manufacturing facilities, structures the size of small moons. If their construction rate matches their tactical advancement, they're not just learning to fight us. Zextara completed the thought. They're preparing to fight everyone. High Chancellor Morgeth stood slowly, his arthropod frame radiating authority despite the fear that Zextara could read in his posture. Emergency session. Summon the Military Council, the Science Directorate, and Intelligence Command. If these reports are accurate, the The Coalition faces an existential threat. As the chamber began to empty, Zextera found himself staring at the tactical displays, still showing human ship movements throughout Coalition space. The patterns were beautiful in their complexity, like watching a vast organism extend tendrils throughout the galaxy. But they were also terrifying because each movement brought the humans deeper into Coalition territory. Admiral, Chancellor Velmora approached, her crystalline form casting rainbow shadows across the floor. In your professional opinion, what are the humans ultimately planning? Zextera considered the question carefully. Every engagement had shown the humans to be ruthlessly efficient, but also surprisingly restrained. They could have destroyed his entire fleet at New Terra, but instead allowed most ships to escape. They could have pursued and eliminated the survivors of Admiral Kexnari's force, but chose not to. Chancellor, I believe the humans are not planning to destroy us. I think they're planning something far more sophisticated and terrifying, which is they're planning to replace us completely. And based on what I've seen of their capabilities, I'm not certain we could stop them. As Zextera left the war room, he couldn't shake the feeling that every move the Coalition made was being watched, analyzed, and incorporated into some vast plan that he couldn't begin to understand. The humans weren't just winning individual battles. They were winning the war before it had even officially begun. Somewhere in the depths of space, human minds were working with superhuman intelligence to solve the problem of galactic conquest. And Zextera was beginning to suspect that they had already found the solution. Admiral Zextera sat in his private quarters aboard the command station orbiting Tolth Prime, staring at intelligence reports that painted an impossible picture. 6 standard months had passed since the High Command emergency session, and the human situation had evolved far beyond anyone's worst predictions. The reports covered his desk like prophecies of doom. Human fleets had appeared in 37 different star systems simultaneously. Not small raiding forces, but massive armadas that materialized as if from nowhere. Each engagement followed the same terrifying pattern. Coalition forces would arrive to investigate human activity, only to find themselves facing enemies who fought with supernatural precision and coordination. More disturbing was the pattern of human behavior after these victories. They didn't occupy conquered territories or establish military governments. Instead, they did something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They began negotiations. A soft chime announced an incoming transmission. Admiral Sarachan's face appeared on his personal display, the same human commander who had warned him to withdraw from New Terra. Despite months of studying human facial expressions, Zextera still found their features difficult to read. But Chen's voice carried unmistakable authority. Admiral Zextera, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you personally before tomorrow's formal proceedings. Tomorrow, the day the Coalition High Command would meet with human representatives to discuss what the humans politely termed galactic restructuring. The day Zextera had come to think of as the end of everything he understood about warfare and politics. Admiral Chun, he responded formally, I am curious why you wish to speak with me specifically. Because you were the first Coalition officer to truly understand what you were facing. Your reports to High Command showed remarkable insight. You recognized that we weren't simply another species to be conquered, but something fundamentally different. Zextera leaned back in his chair, studying the human's expression. If I may ask, what exactly are you? Your capabilities exceed every known physical law. Your coordination implies some form of collective consciousness, yet you maintain individual personalities. Your strategic thinking operates on levels that even our best AI systems cannot match. Chun smiled, a facial expression that Zextera had learned indicated either pleasure or predatory satisfaction. We're human, Admiral. Nothing more, nothing less. But humanity has evolved somewhat since we left Earth. Evolved how? We learned to think together while remaining ourselves. Individual consciousness linked through quantum neural networks that span our entire species. When one human learns something, we all learn it. When one human faces a challenge, We all helped solve it. Your coalition fought individual ship crews. We fought as a single organism with millions of specialized components. The revelation struck Zexthara like a physical blow. You're saying every human is connected to every other human? In a sense. It's more complex than that, but essentially accurate. When you attacked New Terra, you weren't fighting 47 ships. You were fighting the accumulated knowledge and reflexes of 12 billion human minds working in perfect synchronization. Impossible. No species could maintain individual identity under such conditions. Most species couldn't, Chun agreed. But humans developed something unique during our expansion into space. We call it the enhancement, a symbiotic relationship between human consciousness and quantum computing systems. It allows us to share information and coordinate actions while preserving individual personality and creativity. Zexthara felt the universe shifting around him as the implications became clear. Every battle, every encounter with coalition forces, you were gathering data about our capabilities, our tactics, our psychology. Yes, and feeding that information to every human in the galaxy instantaneously. By the time your second fleet engaged us, we understood coalition warfare better than most coalition officers. By the fourth encounter, we had developed countermeasures for every weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every command protocol in your arsenal. But why reveal this now? Why explain your capabilities to an enemy? Chin's expression shifted to something Zexthara couldn't quite interpret. Because tomorrow isn't about conquest, Admiral. It's about graduation. Before Zexthara could ask what she meant, Chin continued. For 200 years, humanity has been preparing for something far greater than territorial expansion or resource acquisition. We've been preparing to take our place as guardians of galactic civilization. Guardians? The galaxy is vast, Admiral, filled with thousands of species at various stages of development. Some, like the Coalition, have achieved impressive technological advancement, but remain trapped in primitive social structures. Endless warfare, territorial competition, zero-sum thinking. Others have developed sophisticated cultures, but lack the technical capabilities to defend themselves against predators. Zexthara's mind reeled as he began to understand the scope of human ambition. You're planning to impose order on the entire galaxy. Not impose. Guide. Humans have learned something that most species never discover. True cooperation isn't possible until individual survival is no longer a concern. Once you can think collectively while maintaining individual identity, warfare becomes obsolete. Resources become abundant. Technology accelerates exponentially. And you believe you can teach this to other species? We believe we can create the conditions necessary for other species to learn it themselves. Some will adapt quickly. Others may take generations. A few may never make the transition. But ultimately, the galaxy will evolve beyond the primitive competition that currently defines interstellar relations. Zexthara stood and began pacing, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what Sean was describing. The Coalition will never submit to human authority. Neither will the hegemony, or the Empire, or any of the other major powers. Submit. Chen laughed, a sound that somehow conveyed both amusement and profound sadness. Admiral, you're still thinking in terms of dominance hierarchies. Tomorrow's negotiation isn't about submission. It's about offering every coalition species the opportunity to join something greater than themselves. And if they refuse, then they'll discover that humanity has moved far beyond the need for traditional warfare. We don't conquer civilizations, Admiral. We simply make their old ways of thinking obsolete. The transmission ended, leaving Zexthara alone with the weight of revelation. Outside his viewport, the lights of Tolf Prime's orbital facilities sparkled like distant stars. Each light represented billions of sentient beings whose entire understanding of reality was about to be challenged. The next day, Zexthara stood in the great assembly hall as human representatives presented their proposal to the Coalition High Command. The terms were unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. Humans offered to share their enhancement technology with any species willing to participate in what they called the Collective Evolution Project. High Chancellor Morgoth's response was predictably hostile. You expect us to surrender our individual consciousness to become components in your hive mind. The lead human negotiator, a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez, smiled with infinite patience. Quite the opposite, Chancellor. The enhancement preserves and strengthens individual consciousness while enabling collective coordination. You would remain completely yourself, but with access to the knowledge and creativity of every other enhanced being in the galaxy. And if we refuse your generous offer, then you continue exactly as you are. But you'll find that enhanced civilizations operate on principles that make traditional conquest and territorial expansion meaningless. Economic competition becomes collaboration. Military threats become opportunities for mutual development. War becomes antiquated. Zextera watched the proceedings with growing understanding. The humans weren't threatening conquest, they were offering transcendence. And they had demonstrated that enhanced humans could achieve things impossible for individual minds working in isolation. Over the following months, the galaxy began to change in ways no one could have predicted. Some species, particularly younger civilizations that hadn't become entrenched in competitive thinking, eagerly embraced enhancement technology. Others remained skeptical, but began establishing trade and cultural exchange programs with enhanced colonies. A few, including core coalition worlds, attempted to resist human influence through military action. These efforts proved futile not because humans crushed them with superior force, but because enhanced civilizations simply operated at levels of efficiency and coordination that made traditional warfare irrelevant. Zextera found himself at the center of these changes when Admiral Chun offered him something unprecedented, the chance to become the first enhanced coalition officer. The decision would mean preserving his individual identity while gaining access to the collective knowledge of billions of enhanced beings across the galaxy. As he stood in the enhancement facility on New Terra, surrounded by technology that seemed more like art than science, Zextera reflected on his journey from supreme military confidence to philosophical transformation. War, he now understood, had indeed held mysteries, not in tactics or technology, but in the fundamental question of what intelligent beings could become when they learned to think beyond the limitations of individual survival. The enhancement process itself proved surprisingly gentle. Rather than overwhelming his consciousness, the quantum neural interface integrated seamlessly with his existing thought patterns. Gradually, he became aware of vast networks of intelligence spanning the galaxy. Millions of enhanced beings working together to solve problems, create beauty, and explore mysteries that individual minds could never have approached. For the first time in his life, Admiral Zextera experienced what humans called true peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of unlimited possibility. War hadn't been conquered by superior weapons or tactics, but by the simple recognition that cooperation could achieve infinitely more than competition. As enhanced humans and their allies spread throughout the galaxy, they carried with them the promise that every species could eventually transcend the primitive drives that made warfare necessary. The universe, Zextera realized, was far stranger and more beautiful than he had ever imagined. And humanity, strange, impossible, magnificent humanity, was leading the way towards something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based not on dominance, but on the unlimited potential of minds working in harmony. The greatest mystery of war, he now understood, had always been why it existed at all when so much more was possible.